Hi, friends. Welcome to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and joining me is my co host for this season, Reverend Kathi McShane. Hey,
Hi,
Kathy.
Lisa. It's good to be with you.
This is the fifth episode of our season in which we explore themes we believe will be essential to the future church and that are happening right now. This is the now and not yet of the church today. I hope you'll listen and share with friends if these conversations have sparked thoughts and imaginings in your own life and ministry. In our first episode this season, we considered hospitality. In our second, we discussed power. The third episode was about place. Two words for the fourth conversation: small boats. And today we are talking about joy. And our guests are full of joy. So here are their brief bios. Tyler Sitt is a pastor, community organizer, and social entrepreneur. Tyler is founder of New City Church and co founder of Intersect Planting Network. New City Church reflects the vision from Revelation of a new city where all tribes are welcomed. There is no violence and the earth is renewed. Tyler's congregation, led by BIPOC leaders, is realizing this vision by focusing on centering marginalized voices, community organizing, and eco justice. He is a 2023 Lock Innovative Leader. Rich Havard is a senior program officer for Wayfarer Foundation, a Baha'i inspired grant making organization that partners with spiritually rooted and justice oriented nonprofits to co create peace and unity in the world. Prior to Wayfarer, Rich spent 6 years starting and leading the Inclusive Collective, a diverse spiritual community for college aged young adults in Chicago. I loved this conversation between Tyler and Rich, who really, with their friendship and their words, embody joy. Kathy, what stood out for you in this conversation?
Oh, Lisa, I thought it was such an inspiring conversation that it almost felt like we were just witnessing it, this conversation between two friends. And what I was really impressed and moved by really was the intentionality of both their friendship and their joy. Um, that they both talked about practices that led to those things. My learning coming out of this conversation was that the way you get to both deep friendship and joy is by cultivating those things. It's somewhere in between waiting for them to happen and commanding them to happen. It's cultivating the space where joy can grow inside of you and where friendship can develop between two people. It was really lovely. How about you? What grabbed you from that conversation?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, you said that so beautifully, Kathy. Thank you. I think there's a holding of space and that's a kind of waiting and making yourself open. I was really struck by the connection between joy and authenticity. Like they didn't avoid all the hard, real, and messy feelings that come in life. Joy is not opposed to those feelings, but kind of in the midst of, right? The midst of our real everyday emotions. And so you think about if joy is connected to authenticity, then it matters that we create space for people to show up as they really are. And that's what I feel like they're doing. It was so beautiful. So let's listen to our conversation with Rich and Tyler. Tyler, sit. Welcome.
Oh my gosh, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And Rich Havard, welcome.
Hello, it's great to be with you all today.
Oh my gosh, we are so excited to jump into this conversation about joy with you two. And we were joking that instead of word association, it's more like person association. Because when we were talking about having a conversation about joy, you two came to mind. And so we're going to jump right in with the first question. What makes you a joyful person? Tyler?
Gosh, I think that as a person who practices prayer, one of the things that I um, hold in my practice is trying to welcome all emotions, whether it's joy or not. And I think that the reinforcement of joy comes from welcoming difficult emotions and then discovering on the other side that there is resurrection in them. So I don't know. It's a little corny maybe, but I think that I the joy that I experience in my life is from welcoming all the non-joy experiences in my life and then letting joy rise up after that.
Oh, I think that's the opposite of corny. I think that's so
I'm here in the
beautiful.
Midwest. It's corn everywhere.
Oh my gosh. Um,
Yeah.
well, I would say one, when you say earlier, Lisa, that you thought of Tyler and I for people who embody joy, I was thinking about how Nadia Bolz-Weber used to say of her congregation in Denver that, there are a lot of people who weren't exactly super Christian in that space. And she used to say, don't worry, I'm Christian enough for everybody. And
Yeah.
so I sort of think about that with me and Tyler, right? Like we're best friends. And I think when you think of joy, you probably think of Tyler a little bit more. And it's like, don't worry, he's joy enough for the both of us.
Oh,
So,
nice.
one thing for me is awareness, right, of the goodness of
Oh,
life as well, not
mm,
negating the pieces like Tyler mentioned, negating the hard stuff that we go through. But I have a mentor that I call about every month. And, when we first get on the phone, I'm all doom and gloom and pessimism, and this is so bad, and this is XYZ. And he'll sort of gently nudge me, not in a way that negates that stuff, but in a way that's also invitational to go to a different place. And he'll gently nudge me about some of the generative things in my life at that time. And there's turns out there's a lot of them. And so my mind is sort of trained, I think, for a lot of reasons. My soul is trained for a lot of reasons to go to that sort of pessimistic place. And he
mm,
invites me to go to a deeper place. And then he always has the same refrain at the end of our calls, which is something like, you have a good life, my friend. You have a good life. And I think it's in those moments where I remember, like, wow, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And I have a really
mm.
good life. And that elicits a deep joy in me.
That's beautiful. You have alluded to being great friends, and both of you exude joy, but there's joy in your friendship. I would love for you to talk about that and what makes your friendship joyful.
Wow. So I want to name a couple things off the bat. One is there's a distinction between happiness and joy.
Mhm.
So I think of happiness as like, right now I'm just seeing my friend for the first time. We haven't zoomed for a while. We have phone calls, but we haven't seen each other. So I just feel this kind of natural exuberance just from
Mm,
that. But that's not really joy. Like joy is kind of, it's not like this flighty, sunny
mm,
emotion up top in the stratosphere. It's like this deep undercurrent, like this grounding sense of God making all things good.
mm,
And I feel like part of our bondedness, Rich, is that like we try to invite each other to step into that awareness, and then we also try to create experiences that remind us of that, even when some of our life doesn't feel
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I was going to go a similar direction with this piece, which is I think a lot of our joy is because of the longevity of our relationship and the
Mhm,
depth of our relationship. And so there's not a sort of like surface level flash in the pan kind of joy, but more of
mhm,
a sustaining ember kind of joy.
mm,
That we've been through stuff, right? Like, I mean, I think about times that I've called Tyler or we've checked in and I've been in tears about certain situations, whether it was something deep, like what is happening in the world. I remember after the Pulse massacre, we talked on the phone and we're both just like
mm,
in deep grief and anguish, or whether it's something, more at the time that sounds like a big deal, like a bad breakup. And then later we
Mhm.
laugh about, right? There's these pieces
mm,
that we've been through stuff. And so we also have these not this sort of like pie in the sky joy, but this sustaining joy that's present in our friendship, where we've also seen the really beautiful things. And one of the things that we do together every year, it started, I think this is our 8th year, Tyler, 8th year, something like that. I know,
Wow.
right? We take a trip together, and it is usually hiking somewhere in the US. And we're going in a couple of weeks to Acadia National Park. And the trip, in a lot of ways, I think, is a microcosm of the joy in our friendship, right? It's like we're hiking for miles and miles and miles and experiencing aches and pains and shin splints because we go too hard and we're getting older. And so all these things are happening, right? And we have these threads of conversation that we've been weaving together for the past, we've been good friends about 10 years. And then also we'll get in the car and we always do a playlist. And I mean, it's everything from contemporary Christian music to gospel to Todrick Hall to Beyonce to Broadway, which is Tyler's personal favorite. And if you ever want to see him really joyful, listen to Hamilton with him. And so we have these moments and these stories that we've been collecting over these years of trips, of both the like intimate moments where we're talking about things that are in the depths of our souls, and these fun moments where we're belting out Broadway and I'm a terrible singer, but Tyler doesn't care. And that's also beautiful too.
I think that in our friendship, there's a real sense of feeling seen and heard. And that is just such an increasingly rare experience for people to feel seen and heard by friends in community. I feel seen and heard by people I'm related to by blood, and I feel seen and heard by my husband. But the friendship that Rich and I have is like, I don't know, like Cole Arthur Riley talks about friendship being so special because it's something that we actively choose to opt into. There's no like legal obligation to stay friends. And I really feel that with Rich. Like uh, the joy is just kind of like a natural outcome of feeling seen and heard in an emotionally intelligent space.
Yeah, and I think joy is also elicited so often. Tyler is a master asker of questions. And so, sometimes they're the sort of like surface level questions that are joyful and those are initial, but those aren't really his MO, right? You all know him, that his questions are ones that drive deep. And he knows this, but I remember about 7 years ago, I was in a particularly like, I don't know, sort of like I was skating across the surface of life kind of way. And I remember on one of our days of our trip, he said, Rich, what is your ecosystem inviting you to become? What are all the pieces of your life that are shaping you, inviting you into, and what are they not? And I was like, oh, why am I friends with you? But really, I was like, this is why I'm friends with you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. There is, as you described joy, there is such depth to it. It's the opposite of skating the surface, right? There's such depth to it. Kathi, I know we asked you to mute, but I want you to jump in, and so I wanna make space for you, and knowing that you have to unmute and then ask and then jump in, so
Thanks for that. I did actually just want to jump in right here, so I will. I'm I'm moved and by each of you talking about being reminded of joy by someone else, Rich by your mentor, and then each of you by one another. And I think we think you either have joy or you don't, but you've each prompted in me a thought that maybe joy is something we offer one another, or at least the invitation or the reminder to it.
Yeah. I feel that deeply. So Miriam Kaba is an educator and an abolitionist, and she talks about hope is a discipline. And this is someone who is doing direct work with particularly Black youth who are experiencing the worst of American society. And she says hope is a discipline because there's no other place that will invite you to it. And I feel like part of the reason why communities of faith are so powerful, part of the reason why spiritual friendships are so powerful is because it gives co-journeyers who invite you to joy and remind you of the discipline of joy. Because if we just base our happiness off of that, of whether or not there's good news in the world, whether or not when you open up your favorite news page, it's good headlines or not, like you're going to be increasingly less joyful. So I feel like we have to cultivate a discipline in offering each other joy and then also holding ourselves to that, not in a militarized, rigid kind of way, but remembering that this is an invitation to the abundant life that Jesus offers.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. I think a lot about the way Tyler works as a sort of both a disruptive and an invitational force in my life. And so I think a lot of our systems and society, sometimes the church, certainly politics, invites us to just spend our time only being in rage and anguish. And those can be healthy emotions, right? Like those things can be really powerful too. But I think it's good for me to have someone who also creates the conditions for me to experience joy, and who sort of whenever whenever most systems in my life are shaping me and forming me in a different direction, for him to come in and sort of stop me and help me pay attention to another way is really powerful. I'm just convinced, we have some really powerful formation systems, particularly in our culture, and oftentimes as people of faith, we don't offer like as robust and muscular alternative formation systems. And so like Tyler, as you all know, is a force to be reckoned with. And so I'm so thankful for his presence in my life, that is stronger and more powerful and more invitational than these other forces that are pointing me to pessimism. His points me to sort of this rugged, muscular joy, and 100%.
Oh, you too. I so appreciate the depth that you are bringing to our understanding of joy, and I want to bring this conversation into conversation with Dr. Barbara Holmes, who says that our faith invites us to choose joy, and I think you all are leaning into this in a beautiful way, and she says, specifically in the midst of crisis and injustice. So she says our current circumstances require resilience and the steadfast belief that joy is a healing inner event and a spiritual practice. And she goes on to say that BIPOC folks who remember the ways of the elders have seen it in action. So the performance of joy, while wounds are still being inflicted, is not a display of otherworldly strength. It is an act of faith. And so I would love for you all to play with that a little bit. Like, what's your response to that? And how have you seen the performance of joy, if you will, while wounds are still being inflicted in the communities that you've served and led and been a part of?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different life experiences of people at New City Church, and different classes and different races and gender orientations and gender identities. Um, 2 weeks ago, I met. It was a first for me, a trans refugee who grew up in another part of well, actually, grew up in South America and then moved to the south of the US, to the south of America. And then, because of anti trans laws passed there, um, jumped in a car with none of their possessions and drove until they
Mm,
got to
mm,
Minneapolis.
mm,
And so, when I talk about joy, I try to hold myself accountable to lots of folks with lots of different varying privileges and marginalizations and awareness of, like, if I'm not talking about faith and hope and joy in terms that make sense to that entire cross section of people, then I'm actually not presenting the gospel. Like how Howard Thurman talks about, if the gospel that you're talking about doesn't make sense to the person whose back is against the wall, then it's not the gospel at all. And I just, as we're returning to this theme of joy, I think it's about the recognition that the forces of hatred and oppression in the world, which I call the empire, want people to feel joyless. And there's a couple of real material reasons for that. Go to any business school, and they talk about how the way that you sell a product is by locating the dissatisfaction that people have with their lives and then convince them to buy your thing as a way to address that. That
Mhm.
means we have like a literal economic system that is driving dissatisfaction in order for us to be consumers in the world. And that's just like a very that's
Yes.
shallow analysis. Like there's a way deeper analysis to be had. But I think it's joy becomes an act of faith when we realize that there are systems and powers and principalities that are inviting us to not choose joy. And therefore, choosing joy is an act of rebellion, an act of
Mm.
abundant life, and an act of creating the kingdom of God right here on earth.
I love that. Tyler said MBA over here.
Yeah, exactly. Number one capitalist.
Well, first, amen to anything Barbara Holmes teaches and says and writes. And I remember reading Crisis Contemplation when it came out, and just such a book that got at the depths, particularly of the pandemic, and also just exuded joy and praise. And I was just struck by it. And so this quote in question is so beautiful from her. And one of the things I think about when I think about this quote she had is a really personal story, which happened. I think as I get older, I'm like, what year was that again? But I think it's 20. I think it's 2015. And when I marched in my first ever Chicago Pride Parade, and I remember I was not out, and I was living a life of sort of in the fetal position, honestly, and was just deeply concerned about what me coming to terms with my own sexual orientation was going to do to my career in ministry, to my faith, to my community, to my family, and was scared to death about all the repercussions that were going to take place for discovering my true self and beginning to embody that truth. And then I was working at a Methodist church called Urban Village Church in Chicago. Tyler and I worked together for a year there, and we
Shout
did
out.
we did some amazing events. We can tell you about those later, full of a lot of joy. But I went to this Pride Parade, and I remember marching for the first time ever be at a Pride Parade. Definitely first time marching with the church groups who were there to show people a fully inclusive gospel. And as I marched, I began to see the faces of people, to see the faces of
Mm,
people who were in the faith group, to see the faces of the onlookers, to see people who had been just wounded so many ways, often at the hands of the church. And I mean,
mm,
sometimes, right, in these ways that are spiritual wounds, but sometimes physical wounds, right, of people who had been in some
mm,
communities, and still that day. There was this palpable presence of excitement and of raucous joy and of pride in the best of ways, and it was honestly one of the last things that pushed me over the edge to be more public about who I was, because I
Mm,
looked at people around me and I said, I want a taste of what they are experiencing.
mm,
And I living this closeted life where I hide a key part of my identity is not allowing me to drink fully of what they are experiencing. And in some ways, I wanted to taste and see that the Lord is good, and I was not
mm,
allowing
mm,
myself to fully dine. I was sort of like operating on crumbs. And I knew that there
mm,
was more on offer. And I remember that day just thinking about the pure joy. And there's a picture of me from that day. And one of my friends knew that I was thinking about coming out. And I remember him texting me, and he saw the picture on social media, and he said, "You look so happy."
Mm.
truly.
Yeah.
It's a good
Present.
picture. I think that Rich, when I saw that picture of you, and then later when we had conversations about you coming out, it felt like I was already friends with the Rich, but from before, but I realized that the Rich from before was actually like 70% of what you bring to the world. And then with this, it was like, oh, this feels more like 95%. And like, I think that's kind of the self feeding energy loop of joy and authenticity and community is we just discover that there's more to ourselves that can be in the world than kind of was given permission to earlier. And of course, like for lots of people in lots of different circumstances, that might not be available to them. But I still see the discipline of allowing yourself to be seen, speaking truth, and then resting in the joy that people are inviting you to. I see that all tethered together.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking about Richard Rohr's piece about the discovery of your true self will feel like 1,000 pounds of weight have fallen from your back,
Mm,
and how much lots of folks from many different identities, right, are prevented from discovering their true selves for all sorts of reasons. And when we create the conditions for everyone to feel true belonging and for people to be themselves, and you can't have joy with 1,000 pounds of weight on your back, right?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
you really can when those things begin to fall off.
Mm, 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 mm.
In that lovely story, Rich, from your life, I hear something that sparks in me a question about whether there's a piece of joy that is always includes doing something, right? Whether it's releasing the
Mm.
load that you're carrying on your back. Barbara Holmes' quote has in it that phrase about the performance of joy. And you've been talking about the sort of spiritual discipline of joy. I like it's a choosing, an acting. And I wonder if it is true that we somehow act our way into the feeling of joy.
Mm, mm,
What do you
mm.
think about how much joy just comes to us and how much it takes some sort of setting it up or act to bring it?
And I'll layer that with, Angela Gorel, who wrote The Gravity of Joy, because she actually says it's not a choice, but that the feeling of joy is a gift from God,
Mm,
and that it's a feeling we get. Joy is a feeling we get when we're being ministered to by God. And so I wanna layer that because I think, y you know, we can look at I want us to look at joy sort of from these different angles, and I love the way you've put that, Kathy, about, is there an action that is actually involved in this, and to what extent, right? Yeah. Okay, jump in, Rich.
Yeah,
Tell me more
yeah,
about
it's a great question, Kathy. And Lisa, I, I'm a both and person here, right? And that's my mantra for everything. So much so that when my partner mocks my my spiritual, he'll sometimes like joke about like this is Rich when he's preaching or in spiritual spaces, and his go-to phrase is always, "I'm a both and person about that." So that's my go-to phrase. So a both and here as well. I love that. I think it's that Wesleyan metaphor for grace. I'm not a Wesleyan officially, but all of you can correct me if I'm wrong. Around grace as a sort of waterfall or never flowing stream that we don't create or concoct or build ourselves. It's always there. It always exists. It's always flowing. And the question is, will we dive in? Or will we at least let our hand go in a little bit or let our feet touch the water? And I
Nice image.
think that's what it is for me. It's like joy. Yeah, I don't think we can do much to sort of concoct or create joy out of nothing. God is always offering it to us in a variety of ways. And the question is, are we going to dive in and pay attention to it or not?
mm, mm,
Mm.
mm, mm. Oof, that's good. I am a lifelong Methodist, and I don't remember hearing that in my life, but I feel it deeply.
Yes.
And
Yes.
uh, I guess hmm. The thing about the word choice is, uh, hmm. So I think there's a difference between agency and control.
Mhm.
So I think that there is an opting in to joy because God is a consent-based God who cares
Mhm.
about, whether or not we're choosing to opt in. But I think the kind of Western modern, especially, need to control every aspect of our lives and our society and to punish things that are out of control. I think that um, if we ever talk about joy, like choosing joy is the same type of thing that you control, just like you control your taxes or just like you control your lawn care, like then we're kind of forfeiting it from the get-go. But if it's choosing joy in the sense that you choose to take a deep breath or you choose to dive into a waterfall, like that kind of thing is something I'm on board for all day,
Mm.
every day.
I love this interaction between, that you've created, well, both of you spoken to, but Rich, that you created with this notion of prevenient grace and kind of a prevenient joy, if you will, that
Oh, you were talking about prevenient grace.
Yes.
Yes, I've heard of that. Okay, I have heard of that. I do know that. Let the listener know, I do know what prevenient grace is. Oh, yeah. It's just a metaphor. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Lisa, keep going.
That's awesome. Yeah, and the interplay with what already is, it's this gift of God and the agency that is ours, and that's beautiful. Joy is fruit of the spirit. It's something we long for, we aspire, we lean into, and yet I tell you, as I'm in churches and visiting with leaders in churches, there are many who are feeling less than joy right now. There's a lot of anxiety and a sense of scarcity. There's a lot of change. Navigating and managing the level of anxiety and change in congregations is very hard on pastors and leaders right now. And so I guess I would love for you all to speak to those folks. Like, what would you say to a leader who's not feeling the joy or are not able to access it in this moment? And maybe by contrast, where you are seeing it. But I don't want to go straight there. Like, I want to kind of stay in this place of what about when it's harder to access?
Yeah. I want to say, lest anyone listen to this podcast and think, "Wow, Rich is the person of abundant joy all the time. He's got his joy cards together." I want to also be real because if those people ask my coworkers, they'd be like, "Who?" So um, I struggle with it honestly, and I think that's one of the things, especially. I know we're not going there quite yet, but to say to people listening who struggle is that they're not the only ones who struggle with joy and finding it and staying rooted in it. I'm an achiever. I'm an Enneagram 3. Joy can feel superfluous and like it's not going on my to-do list because I have other things to do. There's this joke at our office where a few years ago we accomplished a rather large task and I name it in staff meeting and then I moved on to the next thing. And our CEO says, Rich, are you going to celebrate that? And at the same time, I took a note about something else, but she thought I wrote down celebrate. And she says, did you just write down celebrate on your to-do list? And I'm like, don't ask me questions you know the answer to. Um, but I think about that a lot
There it is.
of like, how to find this whenever, like I said earlier,
Mhm.
so many of our systems and so many the disposition I lean into often is one of the opposite of joy, right? There's a lot of pessimism and what's going on and sort of a malaise. And so that's just one of the things I want to name for myself. And in terms of being confessional is like, this is really hard.
Mm. Mm. Thank
And
you.
I just want to name Rich, like even in that example, you are someone who throughout your ministry and career have been rewarded as someone who is good with details and who knows how to push projects all the way through and who cares about, like making sure that we're accomplishing and achieving the things that we need to. And um so I think that it's worth naming just off the bat, like how are we being rewarded for non-joy activities and postures?
Mm.
Because if we can't name that, at least there's some type of incentive
Mm,
to
Mm.
do things that aren't joy, it kind of makes it like a blame game for not
mm,
choosing joy when it's like, there's a very reasonable explanation for why Rich chooses to pay attention to that last detail because like everyone always rewards it for that. And by the way, this is another reason why we're friends because guess who isn't? paying attention to the last detail. It's Tyler Sit. So I feel like, I just want to, but I want to name though that like, even in the basis of our relationship, that there are some non-joy activities that are
Mm,
uh, uh, given a lot of freight and given a lot of
mhm,
reward. So, like, all of us are creatures, all of us are animals trying to reward behaviors in each other, and that's like what it means to be a
mm,
society.
mhm,
And like, I think in many ways, as we continue to advance into a hyper-industrialized place, and as lives become more and more complicated, technologically more complicated, it's us collectively naming we would rather reward non-joy activities than joy activities. And that's how we got to where we are.
Yeah, I just want to, one, you all are seeing in real time our friendship, right? How beautiful it says that he's in real time sort of disrupting some of my own thought patterns in beautiful ways. So thank you, Tyler. Um, I also think this piece, there seems to be a cultural moment we're in, and I hope it's more than a moment, and I hope it's a lasting piece where joy is becoming something people are prioritizing. And there was even an article in the Times last week by David French writing about how American culture writ large is seeming to be a little bit tired of the overwhelming negativity and is wanting to choose joy instead. And I'm really excited about that because I think, what if, as Tyler's saying, right, is like we're often not rewarded for moments. It can be sort of seen as superfluous or not necessary. But what does it look like when we start to not just play the individual sort of blame game, as Tyler is talking about, but creating the conditions culturally where joy is not something seen as an additive, but is seen as central to the human experience? And I think that's what I want.
Ah, may it be so. May it be so. So let's turn then to where are you seeing it show up in your work or in the spiritual landscape if we want to go bigger. Um, where are you seeing joy?
Uh, So I want to name off the bat that there's this kind of undercurrent. I run in a lot of social justice circles, activist organizer kind of circles. And there's this undercurrent of if you're feeling joy, then you must not really know all the problems that are happening in the world, or
Mm,
you must not really be caring about, fill in the blank of any sort of tragedy or injustice. And I think that and that's a very powerful force within activist organizer circles, and it incentivizes people to be constantly miserable as a performance of solidarity,
mhm.
and in the process ensures that the movement dies because no one can be miserable in perpetuity. So I think one of the distinctions that is important in my work in ministry is whenever that impulse comes up, if other people are feeling joy, then they must not really know what's going on. Practicing some welcoming prayer and naming, like, when people say that, it's from deeply not feeling seen or heard, and not feeling like the suffering that they're empathetic with matters.
Mm,
So I feel like part of joy is acknowledging to people who are suffering, like, your suffering is so real, and that pain or that injustice is truly outrageous.
mhm,
And um, that is in no way mutually exclusive to having a posture of resurrection to the world, because
mm,
that's what practicing faith is about. So I think just allowing that false binary to crumble away, and instead like lean into it, say, like,
mm,
you're saying that because you're looking for a type of connection that I want to give you as someone who's experiencing joy.
mhm,
Mm. Yeah. Whew. I am seeing a lot of bright spots right now in terms of like where joy is showing up, and some of them are in my own personal life, but some of them are in the like broader field around the social sector. So I work in spiritual philanthropy. So I work for Wayfarer Foundation, an organization that funds spiritually rooted and justice oriented nonprofits. And one of the things that we're seeing and that I'm so excited to see is the way that spirituality is sort of emerging in this field more broadly,
Mm.
and how it's often rooted in a depth of joy and almost party. A few examples, I think about our Policy Link, an amazing organization in this country, one of the leading racial equity organizations, hosted a conference in Atlanta last week, and the theme was soul work, and they had dance parties. And Janelle Monáe came and performed, and
Policy Link,
policy,
soul work.
right? Exactly. And so it's this tie, right? Or I think about Lighthouse Foundation, an organization Wayfarer partners with in Chicago, that works for queer, Black queer justice. And a few years ago, there was a establishment in Chicago that was popular with Black queer people, and the establishment banned rap music, which is really just a dog whistle for we want less Black people to be in here. And what Lighthouse did, birthed out of a church, what they did was the next day they hosted a party in the parking lot at the 7-Eleven next door with street preaching and drag queens and praise music, because they said, we're not going to let this place take away our joy and our party and the depth of experience we have that we know we're loved by God. And it makes me think of, to quote Richard Rohr again, which is not a surprise for Tyler, the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. And so they say, you do your thing, and we're going to have a party over here and invite people to show you there is another more joyous way on offer. And so I love seeing joy bubble up in all these like quote unquote unexpected places in the social change sector.
Mhm. Yes. I think of joy as this act of defiance, right? And we've heard that and that's what you're describing in both cases, right? Yeah. Kathi, you were going to jump in.
I was going to move us along to the rapid fire part of our conversation,
Ooh.
but I did want to also say both of your last responses were so encouraging, right, and heartening, and really call us, I think, not only to the practice of joy, but to attending to joy, to seeing it, noticing it where it is, and not skimming over it or looking right past it. It is there. You've reminded me. Yeah.
Nice.
So
Beautiful.
always in these podcasts, we do a little short answer question. It would just kind of what comes to you first as I ask these questions. So there are three of them. Each of you, if you'd be willing to respond, it would be great. The first one is, do you have a go-to sort of spiritual practice or discipline that helps cultivate joy in you?
Absolutely. So I love, well, sorry, Rich, I'm just going to elbow on in here. Okay, so let's talk about this for a little bit. So I do a welcome prayer, which I describe in my book, Staying Awake, the Gospel for Changemakers. And in that, so I've kind of alluded to this before, but it's the practice of like whatever feeling you are feeling, naming it, and then letting that emotion, that particular emotion, say part of the prayer while acknowledging that it's not the only reality of your prayer life. Because I don't know, in my experience, sadness is ultimately trying to connect me back to God. And anger and rage is ultimately trying to connect me back to God. And even numbness is something I've been working on lately. And I think that the power differential of an emotion that's like really loud in your head and not being welcomed versus an emotion that can be welcomed as part of a broader, richer chorus of emotions, and knowing that like weeping may endure for the night but joy will come in the morning, like that no matter how painful the emotion is, that it's not forever, like that has completely changed my spiritual life.
That's good.
For me, Barbara Brown Taylor says, Earth is so thick with divine possibility, it's a wonder we don't walk around cracking our shins on altars. Put more plainly by Shug Avery, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. So the practice for me is the practice of paying attention, of seeing where goodness and God are showing up all over the place.
Good. That's lovely. Okay, here's the second question. And this is a complete the sentence question. In 20 years, the mainline church in America will find the most joy in what?
Being unafraid of saying goodbye and creating space for what's next. And that doesn't, I'm not like the main line's for sure going to close her kind of thing, but like we as professionals are trained in helping people grieve. And yet as a denomination, we're grasping and doing all of the things that we tell people to not do when they're grieving. So yes, a delightful, emotionally safe, playful comfort with saying goodbye to the things that need to be said goodbye to, knowing there's joy in the morning.
The most joy in the fact that panic and fear about the future have lessened, not because we figured it all out, but because we started loosening our grip and trusting God more.
And the last one, what's the free time activity that brings you the most joy?
This is easy. Watching Survivor religiously with my partner.
Oh no.
Um, looking outside, looking at the sky,
Mhm.
talking to trees. Uh, uh, I don't like I kill all of my houseplants, but if God can be taking care of the plant outside, full yes.
Listen, y'all, Tyler does talk to trees too. We'll be on our trips, and I've told you I'm an achiever. I'm not a details person. I'll be like, I had my mystical moment for about 3 minutes. We've been in it with this tree for about 30 now. So, and I'm still, Tyler's still communing, and I just sit patiently and wait for him to stop communing.
Nice. Nice. So, our final question that we're asking all our guests this season refers to Kenda Creasy Dean's notion of small boats. And so, we've been asking all of our guests to name a small boat that you're seeing that gives us a glimpse of the future church. So, can you share one story of a small boat you think illustrates what God is doing through these new, fresh expressions of church?
Yeah. So probably the signature of New City Church is the Incarnation Fund, which supports BIPOC community members in accessing therapy, spiritual direction, and retreats led by BIPOC practitioners. Because Minnesota is huge. I think in Minnesota as a state is 80% white. Minneapolis as a city is 60% white. So for BIPOC folks to find spiritual and mental health support is like a real cost barrier. And what we're seeing after running this for so many years is that when we attend to trauma seriously and spirituality seriously, the joy that erupts from that is not only something that changes individual lives, but has a ripple effect through households and communities.
Nice.
So when I first think about this question, I'm so tempted to come up with a sexier answer, but I'm going to go with my heart on this one. And I believe the future of the church, there'll be a sort of a complex ecosystem of approaches, right, to church, and things will look very different, and there'll be all sorts of experiments and types of communities in different places doing different things. And I'm also personally a little bit of a spiritual mutt. I'm Baptist by tradition and ordination. I play in Methodist and Presbyterian circles. I work for a Baha'i organization, and now I attend an Episcopal church. So, I'm a little bit spiritually promiscuous, if you will. And so the example that comes up for me is my church in Chicago. It's called All Saints Episcopal Church. It is not flashy. It is not all things to all people. It has not hired 10 consultants last year to design a strategic plan for the next 10 years. It is a place that has been almost died in the 90s and was rebirthed due to the faithfulness of some people who took a risk. And it is beautiful and it is vibrant. It is a real community across generations. I go there for Monday, Thursday, and a 75-year-old woman washes my feet. I can't get that
Mm,
anywhere else in my life. It is theologically rich and spiritually vibrant. It's not this sort of watered down place, but it preaches a life giving and challenging gospel, and people actually believe it. And it's
mm,
locally rooted. Most folks come from the neighborhood. I walk or bike to church, and the church is
mm.
committed both in service and in justice to a particular place, and it is growing. There are 3 services on a Sunday. Lots of people are there because they're incarnating the gospel in a real place in a real way. And so that's my boat right now as I get to experience it myself.
Beautiful, beautiful. You too, Rich, Tyler. Thank you so much for being with us. I needed this. This was a really, um, gosh, not just beautiful, but deep and moving and profound conversation about real joy in our real lives. And you are both a gift in my life, in our lives, and to the church. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank
Both
you
of you are
all.
fabulous. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you all. Thank you for the gift of the questions. I was thinking about them earlier, and then Tyler and I were texting earlier, and then getting here, and yeah, it was a spiritual experience for me, honestly, being here and being in conversation. So thank you all for the opportunity.